trial shows CBD drug Epidiolex failed to yield significant reduction in seizures. So we all know that CBD is the active ingredient in a FDA drug called Epidiolex that was originally under a compound or under a company called GW Pharmaceuticals, which has now been acquired by a company called Jazz Pharmaceuticals. So it was dated August 28th, so a real recent article here. So the world's only widely approved medical CBD formula performed weekly in a key clinical trial in Japan, the maker of the drug reported. Epidiolex, an oral solution for treating rare forms of epilepsy in children, did not achieve its primary goal of significant reduction in seizure frequency in a phase 3 trial, according to Jazz Pharmaceuticals, the parent company of GW Pharmaceuticals, which makes the drug. Phase 3 clinical trials are critical in the 4-phase drug development process because they provide the most comprehensive data on how well a drug works and its safety profile, which is used by regulatory bodies such as the Food and Drug Administration in the U.S., the European Medicines Agency, the EMA in the European Union, and UK's Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, abbreviated MHRA, to decide on whether or not to approve the drug for public use. So despite the weak performance in reducing seizure, Jazz said the trials uncovered no new safety issues and recorded improvements in unspecified other areas. Rob Iannone, the company executive vice president, global head of research and development, says Jazz remains confident that in the overall clinical profile of Epidiolex, which he said has been established in more than 900 different patients in 5 other phase 3 clinical trials. He said the company will continue to work with Japanese regulatory authorities regarding a potential for a new drug application. We recognize the significant unmet need for patients in Japan living with rare epilepsies, Iannone said. The trial in Japan, which was ongoing, is focused in measuring how much seizure frequency changes over a treatment period of up to 16 weeks in 62 children ages 1 to 18 years old. Japanese officials approved Epidiolex for hospital-based clinical trials in 2019, exempting the drug from the country's Cannabis Control Act, which bans cannabis compounds generally. Epidiolex, a high CBD, no THC formula, first won approval in 2018 by the FDA, which later approved the drug in 2020 as a treatment specifically for seizures associated with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, Dravet syndrome, and tuberous sclerosis complex. It was approved by the EMA in Europe and the MHRA in the UK in 2019. GW Pharmaceuticals is considered to be the largest or the biggest medical cannabinoid company in the world, having developed its product under strict regulations for medicines in the markets where it is present. It was acquired by the Ireland-based Jazz Pharmaceuticals in 2021. Sales of Epidiolex reached $845 million in 2023, an increase of 15% from the previous year. Jazz Pharmaceuticals, whose shares are traded on the NASDAQ Global Market, had a total revenue of $3.8 billion in 2023. So that's it. So I found this article to be interesting because, again, first of all, we're talking about specifically Japan, right? So this drug, Epidiolex, is already approved in Europe and already approved here in the U.S. And what we know, well, there's two things that the literature points to, is that Epidiolex is just CBD. It's not full spectrum, right? And what's been shown in the literature is that full spectrum CBD formulations are much more effective than just the isolate packed into a drug, in this case, packed into an oral administration. I'm sure Dr. T has seen some of these data too that basically shows that there is indeed the entourage, or what we call the ensemble effect. And it appears as though, again, it's more bioavailable when it's administered in a full spectrum way. But remember, you're talking about Japan, where their tolerance for THC is let me get this right, 5 zeros and a 1, so 0.0000001%. That is basically their regulatory cutoff for THC. So you cannot win with a THC-containing drug. So I think, I don't know what you think, Dr. T, but I think that, again, this is sort of a demonstration about, we already knew from Meshulam's previous clinical studies that CBD is effective at controlling these seizures in these patients that have difficult to treat seizures. It would appear as though, again, that it would be better to administer a CBD oil. That's a full spectrum oil that has the minor cannabinoid components. But the crux of the matter is that the FDA process for approving drugs only deals with a single active ingredient at a time. I think this is why the FDA has basically thrown up their arms and said, in order to regulate cannabis and cannabis-type products, we need a different mechanism other than just a single active ingredient packed into a drug formulation. The other thing I'll just mention real quickly, because I know we're tight on time, is that CBD is a public composition. It's not patented. The composition itself is not patented by GW Pharmaceuticals. CBD was first discovered by Professor Roger Adams in the late 30s and early 40s. So it's a public composition that even though GW has got this approved drug, they can't use that drug approval to sit down on the rest of the CBD industry who are selling tinctures. So, Dr. T, I don't know how much like a prescription of Epidiolex costs, but what I can tell you is you can go down to the apothecary down the road and for $20 get a nice little CBD tincture that would probably be just as effective as this FDA-approved drug. So I don't know what you think of this story, Dr. T. I thought it was interesting in that, again, it's just in Japan. It's already approved in other areas of the world, and because Japan can't tolerate the multi-spectrum kind of product, I think they're maybe limiting themselves just to this isolate based drug, right? You're muted, Dr. T. You're still muted.
Still on mute, Dr. T. There we go.
It's mostly the form. The Epidiolex is a single agent compound. Definitely works better as a full spectrum from the plant. Although I have had personal patients where it worked 1 week and it didn't work when the batch was changed. So the effect of the other compounds and the variability of the plant makes it sometimes less reliable, even though more effective. What I would suggest to these guys is put it in a nano-emulsion. That way you improve bioavailability rather than keeping the oil form. And then that way you might get more efficacy. And then my big question also is, when they did Epidiolex, the dosage ranged from 10 to 25 milligrams per kilogram, which is a huge range. That's doubling, more than doubling the amount. And were they giving the high levels of CBD that we saw here in the U.S. with Epidiolex? So lots of questions.
I would imagine, because it sounds like it's a pretty extensive phase 3 clinical trial, that they probably did a bunch of different doses and looked for dose-response relationships.
Yeah, I'm curious which one they landed on.
Yeah.
Full spectrum for the win.
So that's my story for today. Let's move on. I know we're tight on time. Thanks, guys.
That's super interesting, Dr. Mark. And I know I'm going to share this story with some of my friends in Japan and see what they have to say about this as well, most definitely. And coming up next, we're going to skip our last commercial today because we're a little bit short on time and make sure we get a little dialogue from everyone's story. And